Nerfers, Nerf herders, listen up! Welcome back, I'm Captain Xavier, and today I'm going to be putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and doing a review on one of the Elite 2.0 blasters, in this case, the Volt. I will be reviewing probably all of them in this manner. I plan to do a very in-depth, critical review. I will start by reviewing it just as a regular consumer, a non-modder perspective, what differences existed in this line from the previous line, and then I will go into the details of how it affects the mod community. I will do a full teardown, open it up, take a look at the internals, look at all the things that they've changed. I will speculate on why. I will speculate on, or give my opinions on the changes that they've made. This is going to be a very critical review. I'm going to say a lot of potentially mean things about this blaster and about Hasbro, so be prepared for that. So the Volt is obviously the next generation from the Firestrike, which was, you know, an upgrade from the Nightfinder, which was an upgrade from probably something in the past. But these are the two most recent. We have the Elite Firestrike and the Elite 2.0 Volt. They are both rear prime, front load, single shot. They hold 2 darts, and they have a little flashlight on them. So they are very definitely the evolution that we have here. Just looking at it cosmetically, I actually really like the Volt. I like a beefy blaster, a heavy blaster. It's got good detailing, good futuristic stuff. It's a step away from the angular designs that they had in the Elite line, which I was also very much a fan of. This has some more rounded bits, some more, like I said, detailing and various sci-fi look about it. And I really do like that. Also, the one thing I don't like is the priming handle. If you look at the difference in the priming handles, I definitely preferred the Firestrike style. Not only because of the just aesthetics, the look of it, but there is some functional difference that we will actually see a little bit later. As far as size goes, they're pretty much the same size. The Volt is a little bit larger at the bottom here because it has additional tactical rail that you didn't have on the Firestrike, and then the tactical rail on the top sits up a little bit higher on this on the Volt. The grips are roughly the same size. The difference is that the Firestrike has a little bit extra grip because of the hook, which is the functionality that we will get into. But they are still both comfortable. Like, even with my big hands, and I know that these were, you know, designed with children in mind, my hand does still fit despite how small this one is. It's a little bit smaller here, but they have the little hook there that helps hold my pinky in, so it's not dangling off the end like it is on some of the, you know, older Busby blasters. It is still very comfortable. Don't like that priming handle, but that's just an aesthetic thing. But let's take a look at some of the functional differences. Now, like I said, they've added more tack rail, and that seems to be, I think, a theme that goes throughout the whole line. We'll see when I get more of them. They have changed the rail a bit. It no longer has a separate locking mechanism of any kind. Previously, it was one that was spring-loaded that locked. Later, they went to one that was just more, it was a separate piece, but it was just kind of friction. There wasn't actually a spring in there. And in this one, they've gotten rid of both of those, and it's just part of the shell, which I'm sure is a cost-cutting measure because you don't have to have the spring, you don't have to have the second piece, you don't have to install the spring or the second piece. That saves in manufacturing. Train! How dare you? I'm in the middle of a review! This one, if those tabs were to break, then they would just be broken. They do appear to be very solid, but they could definitely, potentially, you know, get stress fractured and break off. So, yeah, that is definitely a cost-saving thing. It's cheaper. It's, in my opinion, not as functional, but there you have it. The other thing that they have changed is the location of the dart storage and the battery housing. So on the Firestrike, the batteries are in the grip, which I liked, and the dart storage is under the barrel, which I definitely preferred, because if I had a dart... Ha! Going from your dart storage to loading the barrel was very convenient. It was right there. In the Elite 2.0, they have moved the dart storage to underneath the light, and they moved the battery housing to underneath the light, and they moved the dart storage to the grip. Now there is a precedent for Nerf blasters having dart storage in the grip, but I don't like it. It's a lot more distance to travel, and the dart storage itself seems to mangle the darts more than old ones do, just in order to keep it tight enough for them to not fall out, I suspect. Again, I believe that this was a cost-cutting measure because having the wiring and the switch and all of that right below the light, they were able to solder most of it to an independent piece and then just have the 2 wires that come off to go to the battery housing, and it makes it much easier to install just as a single unit, whereas this one has the switch and the batteries all the way back here, but the light's up here, so they have to route wires, and that would make it more difficult in manufacturing, and time is money, so I'm pretty sure that's why they did that. One thing I do like is the battery housing is now toolless. You don't need a screwdriver to get to the battery housing. It's just friction. It just pops on. That is kind of neat. That is something that they potentially could have done here, but they decided to go with a screw. Again, almost certainly cost-cutting measures because you don't need the screw and you don't need the little nut that the screw threads into. This is just a single piece again. Tack rail, again, doesn't have any kind of a spring-loaded clip. It's just molded into the shell. Not a huge fan of that, but what are you going to do? The thing that I really don't like about the way they did the light on this is the switch. Now, on the Night Finder, it was a dual-stage switch. When you partially pulled the trigger, it would turn the light on. When you pulled the trigger all the way, it would fire. On the Fire Strike, they switched to a secondary trigger that turned on your weak little light. And both of those I prefer because if you let go of the blaster, the light turns off. So you're not going to kill your battery when it's sitting around unless that trigger gets pushed because it's in the, bumped in your toy box or your bin or whatever. Here, it is an on-off switch that is here in front of the trigger. And first of all, it's awkward for me to reach. Turning it off isn't too hard, but turning it on is just not comfortable or easy in my opinion. But more to the point, it is a permanent on or off switch, which means if you turn it on and you leave it and the kid tosses it aside, that battery is going to drain. You will go through batteries with that design constantly if the kid even cares about the light. But yeah, I don't like that design. It being a little bit larger top and bottom does make it perhaps, or especially down here, might make it a little more difficult to put into a holster. Again, not something that the average consumer is going to be concerned about. The color, it's an interesting color. It's a slightly metallic blue, and I'm not a fan of it. To me, it's a beige of blues. It's not a striking color, whereas I felt the blue of the Elite line was a very striking, vibrant blue, and I really liked that. The other thing that I don't like about them changing the color that much is none of the previous attachments are gonna match. And I haven't seen a whole lot of attachments that they've been putting out in this blue. I mean, they've given you a lower rail, but what would you ever put on that lower rail? It already has the red dot sight. You're not going to put a foregrip or a massive flashlight. So having that rail is kind of weird. I think it was just kind of a, let's just put more rail in places. So there's that. But the big functional thing that they've lost was that hook on the bottom of the handle that I mentioned that gives you a little bit more grip, but it also served a functional purpose, which was if you had a second blaster, say a strong arm, which also has that hook, it allows you to hook the priming mechanism in a blaster in your other hand, and it makes it much more convenient for you to be able to dual wield. Very conveniently, and I liked that. And this design of priming pull, suited that better. Now it is technically possible to still hook this one, but it doesn't work quite as well. And this one doesn't have that loop. So that I consider to be a loss of functionality, and one that was unnecessary, because it would not have been difficult to have that hook still. Even if you had the dart storage there, they could have still had that. Well, actually, maybe not, with how far it sticks out. Maybe, maybe not. But I definitely consider that a loss of functionality, which makes this, in my mind, an inferior blaster. Performance-wise, however, it's exactly the same. When I tested these in my chronograph, they both hit 75 exactly, and I fired it more, and it averages around 75. So performance-wise, it hasn't taken a huge dip. It's in all of the other little things that it suffers, in my opinion. But if you're just getting a blaster to plink for a kid, this one, performance-wise, you would think it would be okay. But when we get into the inside, we're going to see some more changes that they made that I feel makes this a decidedly inferior product. And that is what bothers me. So let's get this thing open. And it's not a simple endeavor, because as you have probably heard, or if you have not, now you're going to hear it, there are no screws in this blaster anywhere. Not on the inside, not on the outside, not a screw to be seen. And so how do you get into this blaster? Well, I'm going to show you. Take that out first. The first thing you have to remove is this black part of the grip. It is a separate piece, and it is clipped on, and you have to get it off. And it is not designed to come off easily. I had to start up here at the very base and pry it open enough to get another screwdriver in under it, and then pop it forward, and it will come loose. And now that I've done it a couple of times, it's easier, and I don't damage the shell as much, but I definitely marred the shell when I was doing it the first time, because I didn't know where the clips were. I didn't even know if it was clipped. It could have been glued. But it is clipped. And let's take a look at those. There are 4 clips on either side that are holding, or 2 clips on either side that are holding it in, 4 in total. And I can already see stress marks on them, that those tabs are quite likely going to break if you take this off repeatedly. And you could replace it with some screws, but then you're gonna have, unless you get like countersunk screws, you're gonna have, like, if you just use regular Nerf screws, they're gonna be on the grip and it's gonna be slightly uncomfortable. You could file down the clips a little bit so that they don't hold as well, but then you run the risk of it popping off when you don't want it to. You could hypothetically drill holes in the grip so that you can push something in to release the clips. But again, you know, that's whether or not it's worth it becomes the question. From here, you now have to pop the rest of the shell open. And the first 2 clips you can actually see. They are here and here in the grip. And you can just push a screwdriver in and it will pop them loose, and that will get the whole thing started. Again, I've done this enough times that some of the clips are a little bit looser, and I could probably get them to pop loose if I just pulled hard enough. But for the most part, you're going to have to wedge it open bit by bit. Let's try the bigger screwdriver first. And again, using a metal screwdriver to do this, I am distinctly marring the case. And that is unfortunate. You can get your fingers in on either side of here and just pull it open a little bit. And then again, pop it open. What we need to find, if people really want to make this a viable option, we need to find a source for a good plastic shim. We use similar things in the computer repair industry for popping the bezels on like laptop cases and stuff. And it's a hard enough plastic that you can get the torque you need to pop the clips, but not so hard that it's going to damage the shell. So if anybody has a source for those, preferably something on like Amazon or a computer parts store, basically we're looking for a hard plastic screwdriver or some kind of a shim. Once you get it all the way popped, there is one post that holds it. There are a couple of posts that kind of hold it together, but they're luckily not glued in. And you can get into the shell. And now we see, again, like I said, this whole flashlight housing is very almost self-contained and compact. It makes it much easier to install. It just drops in. It's not glued in as far as I could tell. It's just friction fit in. There's no screws in there. But here we get to the part where, again, I feel this is a decidedly inferior product. And that is what they have done with the trigger and the catch. It does not have a trigger return spring. It just has this little plastic nubbin that is acting as the spring. And that is going to wear out. And quickly. I imagine. And then your trigger is not going to return well. But what's far worse, Train, got another one, is the catch spring is the same kind of thing. Where it is not a proper metal spring, it is just a bit of the plastic that's been molded to create a spring. And that is just not going to hold up to any kind of upgrades. That is not going to hold up, again, to the test of time. That's just going to wear out. That is, again, I understand it for cost cutting. It's super easy. You don't have to have one metal parts, which are more expensive. The person who's putting it together doesn't have to have a bin of them that they attach and put it on, and half the time spraying the spring across the room. It's one piece, you drop it in, and you're done. I understand the reason, but it's lower quality. It is an inferior product, and we have always been willing to pay extra for Nerf products because they were better quality. The plastic was better, the designs were better, the performance was better. We were willing to pay the extra for it. This is something, you don't even see stuff this cheap in the off-brand blasters. Even most of the garbage blasters that I trashed in my 100th episode of K26 had proper springs for the catch and the trigger, and those things were as cheap as you could get. So to see Hasbro doing that is really very disappointing, because that is simply an inferior design. The rest is pretty straightforward. It does have a decent spring. And here we get into something that I actually do consider potentially an improvement. The plunger head doesn't have an O-ring. It is instead made out of a softer plastic and then has a lip right at the edge. And so you're getting that seal just from plastic on plastic. And it's still getting exact same performance. And O-rings are actually something that wear out. So if this design would prevent the issue of the O-ring wearing out and you losing your seal, that could actually be an improvement if that does in fact hold up, if it will work under higher pressure. You'd obviously need to keep it well lubricated. The plunger head doesn't come off, it's clipped on. That is annoying. And it is a design where the spring compresses down into the plunger head, which restricts what springs you can use. It has to fit over the plunger rod and fit inside the plunger head. You might be able to cut that down, but I don't know what that would do to the seal or the alignment or anything like that. But if you could get a spring of the right dimensions that fit there, then yeah, you could upgrade this. But it probably won't take K26 because of the plunger head design. This is also just clipped on, and that's traditionally been clipped on, and sometimes they glue it and it's annoying, and they have not glued it here. And so you could pop this off and take out the AR and brass the barrel and all of that. So that at least still works. Now we get to something that actually is kind of neat. And that is reassembled. That's actually kind of cool. Now, if you could disassemble it that fast, it would be fantastic, but you can't. So, that is the downside. So yeah, there have been, I believe most of the changes were intended for cost cutting. They also make things harder for modders, which probably does not hurt Hasbro's feelings at all. But what bothers me is that means that you can't maintenance this blaster. If this blaster were to break, if that spring were to, those springs in there were to break, getting it open to repair that would be very difficult. And then once you got in there, unless you had the parts and the spare and the tools and the ability, you wouldn't be able to repair it. Now there are ways that you could do that. If you were to cut that tab off and well, obviously we could 3D print new catches and new triggers that then did have mountings for regular springs. That would be the easy way to go about it. You could also cut those tabs off and, using a small enough screw, put a screw into the back of it to act as a spring mount, and then add springs yourself. As far as getting the blaster open, you could, like I said, round the clips. So the clips are currently, they're angular, so it clips on. If you were to round them slightly, it would be easier to pop it loose, but then you'd run the risk of the thing popping apart when you primed it under a heavy enough spring load. You could also drill holes where the clips are so that you could simply push in. One thing that I was worried about with the clips that are in the grip, I mentioned that they were already getting stress marks and that those are probably going to break. The rest of the clips around the shell are thick and have a parallel supporting beam. And I haven't seen any stress marks on those. Those are well reinforced. And so that's actually kind of nice. But it does mean that if you were to try the drilling holes technique in order to be able to push the clips loose, they might not flex enough for that to even work well. Plus, the drilling of the holes thing. To be very clear, that is not something we should have to do. We should not be having to retrofit Nerf products just to be able to open it to repair it. That is just bad design, that is bad marketing, that is simply a bad decision. Whatever their reasons for doing it, I don't feel that they justify producing an inferior product in the way that they have, especially since it's not any cheaper. These were both $10, and this is an unquestionably superior product to this one. Both in having the dead man switch, having the hook that works there, having the dart storage closer to the barrel, having the blaster be able to be opened, having proper springs for the catch and the trigger. This is a superior product, in my opinion, in pretty much every regard. The only thing that this has going for it is the cosmetics. If you like those cosmetics, then this is really neat. And obviously, if you don't like the color, you can paint it. That's not a problem. But just about everything else about this is, in my opinion, decidedly inferior, and that is frustrating. Having all those cost-cutting measures and then not passing on that savings to the consumer is problematic. One would argue that it's very selfish, it's very short-sighted. If you're going to make an inferior product, you should sell it for less. But really, you just shouldn't make an inferior product. So that's my views on the Volt. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments as far as my suggestions for how you could deal with the problems. I'm definitely going to continue to recommend that you contact Hasbro and complain because they have produced an inferior product and are still charging full price. That is something that we need to complain about. Even from just a regular consumer's perspective, not just from a modder's perspective, but many of my biggest complaints have nothing to do with its mod potential. It's simply inferior. I don't like that trigger pull. I don't like that switch. I don't like that it stays on. I don't like that they took the hook away. I don't like that they moved the battery things. Those are all things that I feel make this objectively inferior. Now, there are some people that may actually like those changes, and that's fine. You are perfectly welcome to think so. You're even welcome to comment that. If you think that, no, having the dart storage in the handle is better, and here's why I think so, or getting rid of that hook is brilliant, and here's why. The hook was always catching on my gear, or whatever. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but there are definitely things about this that I feel are unquestionably inferior, and I think that it needs to get pointed out. So that's what this video was about. Let me know which one you would like to see next. I am going to try to get all of them, but I don't know in what order. Part of that is just availability. I'm waiting for them to become available online so I can order them because I live in the middle of nowhere. Alright, now you know how I feel. Thank you for watching.